All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Jubilee Pham, and today I'll be presenting on the tension between skill, passion, and God's calling. So to start off, I don't want to be that person, but for all of you students in the room, how many of you know what you want to do after college? Just by a show of hands. Okay, one person. Okay, so for you who raised your hand, more power to you. Congratulations on knowing what you want to do. For those of you who didn't raise your hands, even more power to you because you probably need it. Okay, so the reason why I asked this is because according to a 2016 workforce readiness survey by McGraw-Hill Education, only 40% of college seniors actually feel ready for postgrad life. And I chose this topic because I consider myself as part of the 60% who don't feel prepared. Just so you know a little bit about me and where I'm coming from, I'm a senior journalism major with an emphasis in writing and publishing, but I don't want to be a journalist, and I'm not super enthusiastic about writing. Whenever I tell people that last part, they're either surprised, disappointed, or both. But it's true. I only have this vague sense of where I want to go, and if someone asks me that question of what I plan to do after college, I kind of get this blank look on my face. I'll shrug and go, I'm thinking of doing XYZ, I guess, but I'm not confident about it at all. So because of this, I started to become really frustrated with myself about why I felt this way, because that's a lot of pressure, trying to know what I want to do, both as a soon-to-be working professional and as a Christian trying to find God's purpose for my life. So when I sat down and really tried to think about it, I came to the conclusion that this feeling of readiness, or rather unreadiness, can be broken down into three categories: passion, skill, and calling. So for this presentation, I gave some simple definitions for these terms. Passion is what you want to do, skill is what you can do, and calling is what God enables you to do. Now, I believe that a lot of Christians tend to use these terms interchangeably. They'll say things like, oh, I'm passionate about this and that, and it's what God's calling me to do. Or I'm really good at this, so I'm going to do that because I feel like it's what God's kind of directing me towards. So it's kind of all mixed together, but from what I found, it's actually more like this Venn diagram. As you can see, passion, skill, and calling are all their own circles. And ideally, the goal is to make all three intersect so that you can get that golden spot right in the middle. It's just that for some people, it might happen when they're as young as 7. And for others, it's a long process that might take years and years. And maybe they don't intersect at the same time, too. Maybe you'll find that you have passion and calling that are already intersecting, but it takes a long time for skill to grow, and it's not even in the picture yet. For myself, I would say that my Venn diagram looks something more like this. As you can see, the circles are not equal sizes, and passion and calling haven't even intersected yet, which I'll get into later. So I'll be walking through these three categories in the context of my own personal journey and through my time here at Biola, because I don't have it all figured out. Even though I'm still not 100% sure of what my future holds, it's still been helpful for me to look back and put everything into perspective. And if you also struggle with not knowing what you're going to do, hopefully this will help you too. So when I was younger, if I wasn't doing schoolwork or watching cartoons, I was reading books. I was one of those kids who would stay inside during recess just to finish one more chapter. And I would bring a flashlight into bed just so I can get away with reading under the covers. My parents are here right now, so now they know that. Sorry, Mom and Dad. So even though I read whatever I could get my hands on, I always went back to mysteries like Sherlock Holmes, the Hardy Boys, Encyclopedia Brown, the Boxcar Children, and my favorite, Nancy Drew. As I burned through book after book, I eventually realized that there are 3 different things that drew me into a good mystery, or really any well-executed story. 1, it provided escape. I could go into another reality and travel to different countries and different worlds, and it was all inside my head. I didn't need pictures or movies because I could just imagine what was happening on my own time and on my own terms. 2, there was usually a lot of emotional investment involved. I connected to the characters, I got to know them on a personal level, and even step inside their shoes. This made reading more intimate and made me feel really special. because it was just something that I did on my own. And because I was able to experience all these things, it made me ask a lot of questions about myself and the world around me. Sometimes they brought up really difficult questions about morality and actions and attitudes that I struggled with and eventually worked through. And because of that, that ended up making me a better person. Even though I started reading for pleasure less and less, I really held on to the impact that books had on me, and that feeling that I got from it all throughout high school. So naturally, I thought I should major in something where I could read a lot of stories. So when I started at Biola, I was actually an English major with a literature emphasis. And I did read a lot of stories, which was great, but I also wrote a lot of essays, which wasn't as great because I always considered writing to be this huge drag, even though people kept telling me that I was good at it. But then I started feeling like that was all that I was doing. I was either reading, or I was writing about what I read and what I thought about it. I also realized that since I liked interacting with stories much more than writing them, I should become an editor for a publishing company, because I've also been editing all my life, just through proofreading emails or helping my friends write their essays. So it just seemed like the most natural course. I didn't want to stay with English though, because everyone knows that if you're an English major, you either want to be a teacher or a novelist, and I didn't want to do either. So when I discussed this with a good friend of mine, they casually said, maybe you should try journalism instead. And when I did some research and found out that Biola's journalism program has a writing and publishing emphasis, I just jumped for it. So I switched majors right at the beginning of my second year, and it was probably one of the best decisions I've ever made. Because Biola's journalism program stresses the importance of building well-rounded skills and gaining practical experience. Right off the bat, my advisor, Dr. Longino, he told me that I needed to get out and get involved so that I could be prepared to be an editor right when I walk across the stage to get my degree. So that's what I did. Now, as you can see on the editing side, I'll probably go in a circle, so we'll start on the left. I became an editor for Inkslinger, which is Biola's club-funded literary journal, and now I'm the president of it, so I help evaluate things like poetry and short stories and black and white photography and artwork. And then I also became a story editor for The Point, and I eventually worked my way up to becoming managing editor, which is what I'm doing now. And down below, I helped copy edit a one-off magazine called Shotgun, which was just put together by a group of women on campus before they graduated, because they just had a vision and they wanted to fulfill it. So I was glad to be a part of that. And then just last month, I did my first freelance gig because I took the time to network, which is a really important and grown-up thing to do, and copy edited an actual novel for actual money, which is right there, A Higher Ransom by Aaliyah Israel. And I'll even be copy editing another manuscript over Christmas break for another author. But I also realized that in order to be a good editor, I also needed to be a good writer. As I mentioned before, I'm not as into writing as someone with a writing emphasis should be. But I started writing a lot for my journalism classes, and I still do. There were still essays, but there were also blog posts, news articles, movies, and food reviews, research papers, narrative essays, future stories, basically the whole spectrum of writing. And in addition to all my classes, I wrote for Odyssey for a year, which is an online social platform for college students. I wrote an article once a week, every week, about whatever I wanted. And by the time I left Odyssey, I had written around 50 articles, more or less. And I'm really glad I did all that writing, now that I look back on it, even though I wasn't really enthusiastic about it before. I'm really glad that people in my life pushed me to pursue writing more. And the great thing about being a part of the journalism program is that through acting and thinking and writing like a journalist, it's helped me to be more attentive. It's helped me to be more careful in the way that I write and how I approach subjects. And that in turn has helped me so much with my editing skills. So last semester, I also had the privilege of being part of a journalism class called Media Narrative Project, which is only offered once every other year, because the whole point of it is to write and publish a book together as a class. In this case, my classmates and I wrote about immigration and the US-Mexico border, and we called it Beyond the Wall. It was a really tough topic, especially since the presidential election was still fresh in people's minds, but it was completely worth the hard work. And since I wrote one of the chapters about the DREAM Act, DACA recipients, and undocumented students, I'm officially a published author now, which is not something that a lot of college students can say. And lastly, right there in the middle is Red Hen Press, which is a small publishing company in Pasadena that I entered for last semester. As a publisher's office publisher's office intern, I did a little bit of everything, which included editing, writing, but also things like social media promotion and book designing. And this should have been what everything else was leading up to. I thought that this was my chance to break into the publishing industry and be well on my way to becoming an editor. But it just felt off right when I started and all throughout my time there. And don't get me wrong, I enjoyed my time at Red Hen, and I learned a lot, and I put all the skills that I had been learning and developing here at Biola to good use. But it didn't feel like it was what God wanted me to do, and that suddenly brought all of this into question. So now I'm kind of back at square one. I don't really know what I want to do, and I'm still trying to figure out what my calling is. But every Christian does have a calling. There's obviously the Great Commission in Matthew 28:19-20. Everyone kind of knows it, but it's go and make disciples of every nation, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, and so on. And there's also Ephesians 1, which says, as a prisoner for the Lord, then, I urge you to live a life worthy of the calling you have received. So you know that as a Christian, those two things definitely apply to me, but it also brings up a lot of questions, because even though I know what my general calling is, I don't know what I'm specifically called to do. And when it gets to the point of where I do know, what if I don't like it? There are definitely examples of this in the Bible, like when Moses was called to lead the Israelites out of Egypt, and he said, no, you have the wrong guy. Or Jonah, who was called to minister to the Ninevites, and then literally tried to run away in the opposite direction. So I started panicking about this, because I thought, what if I really didn't want to do what God called me to do? But I found that notable pastor and author John Piper helps answer this question. He says, would God ever call a person to a lifelong work in which he does not enable the person to have joy? And I think that the answer to that is this. God intends to give his people joy and thankfulness and a sense of usefulness, whatever he calls them to. Paul knew how to be content in every circumstance. This is the essence of the Christian life, finding contentment in Christ and turning every circumstance and all our work into living worship. So for me, I do have things in my life that do make me feel joy and do make me feel useful. I still love stories, and I still want to be a part of creating them. And even though I don't know what's going to come of it or where it's going to lead to, I'm still going to pursue it. But for now, when you look at my website, my tagline is, I can help you tell your story. And I also market myself as both an editor and a writer because it's what my time here at Biola has equipped me to do, and it's all the skills that I've been learning so far. So of course I'm going to try to use that. So as I go into my last semester here at Biola, I honestly don't know where God is leading me, but I do know that like a Nancy Drew mystery, he's going to do it one step at a time, as frustrating as it is. And I do know that one day I will achieve that perfect Venn diagram. And if you struggle with that too, then hopefully this presentation has helped you to think about the 3 different categories and how that fits into your life. And then one day you will achieve this too. So that concludes my presentation. Thank you so much for coming and listening. I'll now open the floor to any comments and questions you might have.